Okay, so there we go. We'll find out. Come back in 10 years and we'll find out. Okay. Ayin Dalet Amud Beis. We are on. We are actually right on the last of the short lines on the page. Ayin Dalet Amud Beis. Amud Beis. Okay.
You're going to get there.
And the first words on the line is Hagozes es Hatzemra v'hamalabno. Okay. So this is we had done last the malach of Sidur de Pas, which was the order of the baking of bread. We had Lush, we had Ofer, we had Tochen, we had Borer, we had a whole bunch, and now we'll continue moving into the listing of the malachos, many of them, and variations on the malachos, because we listed them in the Mishnah, and we're going to Gozes es Hatzemra v'hamalabno. So this is all about preparing, it's all about shearing the sheep, to prepare them to get wool and to get threads, and so we can able to weave and sew and prepare the different curtains and things and items that were used for the Mishkan. So the Mishnah, the quote just part of the Mishnah goes, this is the Tzemra v'Hamalab. No, there's a whole bunch of malachas that apply to them, just very quickly with no particular order. You have Gozes, which is shearing. You have Malabno, which is bleaching, because the wool does not come out very white. It comes out more like an ivory. You have Menapzo, which is combing the wool. You have Tzovo, which is dyeing, coloring the wool. Tove is spinning the wool. And then you have 3-4 malachas that talk about actually how the weaving process was. Mesach is threading the loom. Osa Shtei Bati Nirim is threading the harness. Orek Shtei Chutim is weaving 2 threads. Potzeh Shtei Chutim is thinning out threads. And that really takes us through the malachos about weaving. And then you got kosher, which is tying. Matir is untying. And tofer shtei tfiros is sewing 2 stitches. And kremanas litfor shtei tfiros, then untying or breaking the stitches to re-sew them. So let's take a look at this. It's really a number of variations on the malachas. Amar Rabba bar Bachana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So this, you got to be a Superman to do this. Hatave tzemer shalgabe habehema. If a person spins the wool into threads while it's on the animal, b'Shabbos, chayav shalosh chatos. They're chayav for 3 different malachos. You got 3 chatos, because you did 3 separate malachos. And you're going to say, how is this possible? Well, it was actually done, we'll see, in the days of the Mishkan, by the wise women. But I believe if you are skillful, you can attempt something close to it, because my experience with really, I'm not a herdsman, but if you go over to the old, the zoo where they have these animals that you can go over and pet, you can actually pull the wool off in little clumps, right? It's not like pulling hair out of your head. It's a lot looser, especially as it gets thicker and thicker and thicker. So it is possible to do some of this in small quantities at a very slow speed, and so it's not completely out of the question. This could be done. Surely people don't do it. But you get 3 separate affairs. One is achas mishum gozes, one is for shearing. The achas mishum menapes, and one is for combing. The achas mishum toven, the third malach is going to be because of spinning.
It's nothing to do with riding on a horse or whatever.
No, it's nothing to do with riding on a horse. It has to do with whether you're going to make wool.
No, they said 3 affairs. I thought one would be like riding a horse or something.
You're not riding a horse. You simply just.
No, but it says on top of Gabi Behemoth. Didn't say that.
No, what?
Tovet semer. If you weave wool that is on Gabi Behem, on top of the animal.
The back of the animal.
The back of the animal.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought excuse me.
The purpose is.
I thought he was right. The person was riding on the animal.
The purpose of many of these examples are, the Gemara likes to work with examples.
That's fine.
What kind of example can you give that can give multiple malachas?
Right.
Anybody can do malach on Shabbos, but can you be so clever enough to get more than one chatos and get 3 chatos at the same time? We had this before. Last time we saw if you made a oven and you made some kind of a utensil and you made a kaveret, which was the upside down looking beehive made out of reeds. You got 8 or 9 or 11 or 13 chatos and so forth. But it's very possible. Or you threw the clod at the palm tree and it came off, and there was also for kosher and it was also from a farik for unloading. So those are the 3. So I've got.
Sorry, what's the difference whether it's on the animal or not? Like in terms of these averas? Like, what do I miss?
The answer is, well, if you're doing it on the animal, you're also going to do other malachas. You're shearing at the same time. Normally, these are three separate stages. You shear the animal, that's one stage. The next stage is going to be malafes, which you're going to comb it. Right? So in other words,
okay, thank you.
You haven't done anything more except you've bundled them all together at once.
Okay.
And you've done something in a fantastic kind of form that most people would not consider doing, because normally each of these pieces is separate. That's why they're separate malachas. That's why the normal process is that they're separate malachas. If they're normally done together, it'd be one malacha. So Rav Kahana, Rav Kahana Amar, Ein derech gziza b'kach, v'ein derech menapes b'kach, v'ein derech tiva b'kach. This is not the normal way. So you don't normally do this. If you do not normally do this, you cannot be chayiv min haTorah. You would likely be chayiv min Rabbanan, because we have a rule that kilachayat, if you do something in a shinoi, in a backwards fashion, an unusual fashion, it is not what HaKadosh what you normally do, and therefore it can't be creative labor. This comes up in a number of situations, righty writing with the left hand and so forth, okay? So Rav Kahana basically says this isn't done. Nobody does this. You want to do it, gezun to hate, but you won't really actually be chayiv. You will be chayiv rabbinically because it looks like the Torah level prohibitions, but you're not chayiv min Torah. So Gemara says, "V'lo." What you mean? Nobody does this. V'yotanyin. There's the very famous brayso that comes up in Parshas Tetzav or Parshas Truma or Vayeka. I forget now. Atanya mishmei d'vav Nehemiah shatuf b'izin v'tavu b'zim. It says that refers to the nashim chachamios, the wise women who were able to tavu es hoizim. That it says they were able to, tavu is the word, means to spin. They spun es hoizim, the goats. Now, you would not say they spun the goats, you would say they spun hairs that were taken off of the goats. Yeah. So the Medrash says, this is the famous Medrash that says, Alma, they spun it directly off of the goats. They actually were able to kind of pull it right off and put it into the loom while it was still on the backs of the goats. And that's shatuf boizim v'tavu boizim. That while it actually was on, that learning it out from the terminology in the pasuk in the Torah.
And where do we learn that they did
this? Where is this found? The pasuk is found in Shmos.
No, I don't mean the pasuk itself, but where do we learn that it means that they did it on the animal, like while it was still sitting?
Right here. Tanya mishmei d'Rab Nehemiah shatuf boizim v'tavu boizim alma tviya al gabi behema shmei tviya. So in other words, they did it. They did the sewing, and they did the cleansing, and they did the.
There's a brisa that says this in the name of.
Right, the brisa, as many brises, they look to find the largest types of miracles and the largest, right, that's going on. So, and these were called the wise women. They had halacha-theory. So consequently, they did something unusual. What was so unusual? And that's what the pasuk tells us. They actually did it while it was on the animal itself. If you can do it for a goat, you can do it for a sheep as well. Probably more difficult
even
on a goat.
Easier for a sheep,
right. But what you do see from this is that the Torah identifies this as tviyah is as spinning. So they washed it, they cleansed it, they combed it, they did everything while it was on the goat in one action. It's like a one-stop car wash. You get in there, does everything all together, cleans, takes the grime off, puts the wax on all at the same time, which you really can't do. Okay, so but you see that tavu is called in this fashion. So the Gemara says, you know what, chachma shiny. That this is really, we had a separate wisdom. This women were called. They were special. They were called. What was the term that was used for the women? That the wise women, they were chachma slave. Anyone can spin, and anyone can comb the wool. So to be a chachma slave, to have this extra wisdom, means you had to do it in an unusual fashion. So the fact that they could do it, and yes, they could do it, but that's not the normal way in which most people can do it. Right? So Tosfos says that the second to last Tosfos just says what's obvious, that yes, it's true, they did it. But what they did is batla daitam, how they could do it is nullified compared to what everybody else can do. When you want to find a malacha and you want to find the way that's normally done, you look at how people did it. Right. So they had this kind of extra patent, extra ability to do it without hurting the animal and making it run efficiently, but that's the exception rather than the rule itself.
Absolutely.
Okay. So Chachmei Seir Shiny. Tan Rabbanan. Okay, now we have a similar kind of case. We have multiple malachas. Actually, there are 3 malachas, one after the other, that you'll do 3 different averas. This is about making feather pillows, or taking feathers and putting them into a pillow. So in order to get the feathers into the pillow, you have to do a couple of things. First of all, you have to find the bird to yank the feather off. Ouch! Okay?
Don't you check that usually first? I don't mean to be... Wouldn't you... Is it easier to get feathers from a shechted animal? Like the flickers, the flaky flickers.
Otherwise, it would be tzad b'alecham, but that's a
So actually, probably for a pillow, yes. Though it's very clear that in the, I don't remember the tshuva from late Middle Ages, talks about what's a very important tshuva about with tzad b'alecham. Can you yank a feather off a bird to use through writing as a quill?
For cipher, that's it.
Just one.
Cipher, for cipher, scribe, anything.
Yeah.
You need it. The chicken is there. Who will know, right?
Yeah.
And the answer is yes, you can, even though it obviously is going to be painful at that moment.
It's a split second.
Right? But it benefits man. Man is able to cause a certain amount of pain in order to be able to do things in this world, be creative. So that's just about in terms of this. Now, is this really going to be the animal's alive or not? It looks in this scenario that the animal is alive. Okay? Or, so, Vamar Shimon Lakish, what is the case here? Tolish is a knaf. You are cutting off, you are pulling out from the bird you're taking out this big feather, right? A big, and you'll see why I said big feather in a moment. Vakotmo, and then you cut off the top of it. Vihamorto is you're taking off of the hairs towards the bottom of the rod. Okay, so you have to, in order to process this, you got 2 parts of the feather. You've got the fluffy feather at the top,
And the shaft.
and then you have the shaft. Now on the shaft, as it goes down the shaft, you will see these feathery kinds of things sticking up. You can't put the shaft into the pillow; it'd be too hard. So what do? You cut off the top of the feather. And that's where you have the top of the rod, where you have the feather. The rod at that point is extremely small and pliant. And then you shed, or you pull off, and you yank off the feathers that are hanging on the side feathers, and you put those into the pillow as well. Probably different parts of the pillow, supporting the others. So this is what you've done. So Rabbi Reish Lakish says, well, you know what? We're talking here about certain types of malachos and processing things from animals. This kind of thing you'll have to do. You'll also get chayav chashosh chatzos. Okay, now, it's a little bit different. I guess not. It's pretty much the same thing. The others as well is, it's one action in the previous case, but here it's really 3 actions, but I guess they're all connected one after the other. Normally you would make it stop and go one into the other. This was you're doing one, you're cutting, you're taking off the top feathers, and you're stripping the side feathers right after the other. So what are the 3 malachas? Tolesh, chai mishum gozes. If you pull off the feather, you pull it out, this is called gozes.
Yeah.
Right? Not kotzer. Kotzer deals with plants, with organic growing materials. So this is gozes, which is shearing. Right? Now, I know the feather may not grow back. I'm not sure if it does or it doesn't. I suspect it does not. It's surely not like shearing a sheep, which grows back fairly rapidly, like you're getting a haircut. Right? This is about removing something that is, at best, well, you know what? It probably will come back, but it will come when the bird molts on an annual basis. Right? Most birds molt.
Beyond my pay scale.
Most birds molt, and once a year, yes. They shed their feathers, and they get to grow new feathers, and they really can't fly during that point. They're very vulnerable. At the same time every year, depending on the species. So, Tolesh Chayv Mishum goes. There's Kotem is Chayv Mishum Mechatech. Cutting, and this is cutting off the top of the feather, is from Mechatech. Mechatech actually deals with leather. You're going to cut the leather into certain spots. The same thing. You have something from an animal. It's not leather, but it's some kind of covering, and you cut it so that you can put it off. Marek, and the last one, which is taking the side feathers off, is Chayv Mishum Amachik, which is smoothing. So what you've got here is you have 2 malachas that deal with processing hides. The first malacha deals with the wool, which was called gozes. The other 2 deal with, what do we say? One was mechatech, which is cutting. And then you have, the other one is memaret, which is memachek, which is smoothing down. Okay? Good. Okay, good. So, in other words, the connection between the 2 is probably the first of the 3, which in both cases is gozes. Next Gemara, hakosher v'amatir. Okay, this is about tying and untying. Okay, Now, many malachos have to be, probably they all have to be in some form or another, malacha miskayemis. It has to stand and exist and remain. Do we have any of them so far? I don't think one. One particular one that always stands out is kotev. Right? If you are writing, you have to use ink that is going to remain. For example, one of the things that Shari Tzedek Hospital did is they developed an ink that not dries out, but becomes invincible.
After a while.
After a while. And I forget how long it has to be, before Shabbos, after Shabbos. And then they reconstitute it, I think, and they read it, or they copy it before it disappears. But that's a non-permanent form of ink. Okay? So that would only make it a rabbinic prohibition. It doesn't have permanence, and it's because we're dealing with cholim, so rabbinic prohibitions get put aside, so they reduce the level of the prohibition. Another example would be about bona, about building. Okay, it's a very large discussion for building about bona kalim. Can you, if you put together utensils, that also consider bona. The difference between building a house and between building a utensil has to do with the fact that the utensil might be less stable in the long run than a house. Right? Would be very.
It's movable.
It's movable, and because it's movable, it can break. And because it's movable, you may only want it for a certain time period, or may be assembled and taken apart. Right? There are certain things that travel around. The Gemara talks about there was a bed of coppersmiths that the coppersmiths used to travel place to place, and they took their bed with them. I guess they were itinerant coppersmiths. They didn't have enough trade in one place. So wherever they went, they schlepped their beds with them. This was some kind of, Lego kind of mechanism. There's also something called menorah shechulios. So some kind of lantern or lamp that they screwed. It looks like the pieces came together. How can I describe it?
It's like the beds we have today. You put them together and you blow them up. Or the
Correct.
tents, like a tent. You put
Right, well, it's basically like furniture that you take to the beach, those kind of things. But the menorah shechulios is something that is actually fairly easy to put together because it looks like an inner rod or an inner kind of rope. So when you didn't screw it together, the sides fell loose, and then when you tied it together, it managed to tighten up the internal one there. So there's a very big discussion about bona for kalim, but it appears to be many Rishonim say if it's easy to put together and it's going to be substantive and it's going to be permanent, so that's it's going to stand for bona, for be bona as well. The case we're dealing here now is with kosher. So kosher actually is fairly important about being permanent. Right? And the question actually is a discussion, and then Rishonim won't really get too much into it, is what does permanence mean in terms of tying a knot? Okay. Is it the knot is a knot that's permanent, or you intend to tie it for permanency? Well, what would be the difference? For example, if I made a double knot, but I only intended to take out the double knot in an hour. Let's say I'm going outside, and I don't want my laces to come out, so I tie them again. It's a really tight knot. But when I get to an hour later, after coming from the snow, I'll untie them. It's not going to be there permanently. So is that it? Or the actual type of knot that I make is really going to be a permanent knot, regardless of how long it really is. But the bottom line is it's clear that kosher has to be a permanent knot. Therefore, something like the bows that we have is not a permanent knot. Okay. The question will be, has come up actually, in the modern chumras that appear. What about these twisty ties? That's actually all knot. You think about it. You don't think about it being a knot because you untie them. But the way you tie them,
it's metal inside. You twist it.
Regardless, it's not important whether it's metal.
But they're not knotted.
They're not knotted. They twist them together, right?
That's not permanent, though.
So it's not permanent, but it is permanent until you untie it. So
but the example you gave with the shoelace is the same thing until you untie this.
Correct, right. So actually may be a problem to tie your shoelaces with a double knot to only untie them later. Maybe the same issue. Correct. But a bow will inevitably untie and loosen up. If you tie your shoelaces, right, and you walk long enough in the shoes, eventually you will stop to need to adjust them. Why? Because they begin to give. There's a give. It's not. That's a non-permanent knot.
But like I have shoes that always untie, so I tie the bow again.
Right. So that may that may be something you want to consult your local rabbi
Whatever
with.
happens on the shear.
You better talk to your wife first.
I can't wear them otherwise. They loosen up every 2 minutes.
I know, but your wife.
I'm saying, okay, it may not be that permanent. But for example, but you're just double tying the
You make a bow, and then the bow you make a one.
I will have to look into it, but it might be a permanent knot. Okay.
But the knots in the Mishkan.
Well, it undoes.
Well, we're actually going to see that they were. That's what the Gemara is going to ask. Why they're not permanent?
Because they took out
Right. That's about what the Gemara is going to say. They had to take everything down. Right. So the Gemara is going to present that, and the Gemara is going to say yes, but they had to take everything down. And what's actually fascinating is there's a discussion about the whole bona in the Mishkan. The Mishkan was built, and the Mishkan, everything put up in the Mishkan was taken out as well. It's a discussion in the Yerushalmi, and actually in explaining the Yerushalmi, some of the Rishonim tried to suggest that, well, when they put the Mishkan up in the Midbar, they never really knew how long they were going to be there for.
They had to move it constantly.
Well, not constantly. There were 42. There were 42 masos. But if you look at most of them take place in a span of about 2 or 3 years. So they settled into, they set up, and they put it up, and they could.
In that span, though, they moved it.
They couldn't. No, in the span, there were times they said they were set up for 8-9 years.
But like you
and
said,
more.
Rabbi,
So,
does permanent mean that it's
correct.
Won't untie itself,
Right.
or does it mean for
So the permanence for kesher may be different than the permanence of putting up a mishkan. And I'll tell you why. Because tying things together by nature is something you want to keep them tied. Right? Whereas you can put up a structure and take it down, or kalim for sure. But tying a knot, that's the whole purpose of putting a knot together. You don't want things to untie in the middle of walking along. In case we talk about the shoes, even the shoes that loosen up, it's very rare. It happens, and I have a pair of shoes that happens more frequently than I like. It happens sometimes they completely unravel.
Right. There's a pair of shoes that I have.
Okay, good. We'll share them. You'll take them one Shabbos. I'll take yours one
I'm just
Shabbos.
saying. That's why I put another. It's a half.
I understand that. I realize. I'm saying, but most of them do not fully untie. They just get looser and they need adjusting and so forth. But most of the time that you want to tie something together, you're doing it as a form of adhesive to make sure it doesn't come apart while you're walking.
Sure.
So the very nature of what a kesher is something that's meant to be. So if you have a kesher that comes apart, that's not really a kesher, because the definition of tying is to tie it. Otherwise, you want it to stay tied until you untie it. That's the whole logic behind it. Mr. Richter?
So the Mishkan wasn't built on a Saturday?
No. Let's back up again. According to pretty much everybody, except Rav Hai Gaon, who's quoted, that the definition of a malacha, we'll go through this again because it's very important we keep this in mind. The definition of a malacha on Shabbos is something that was needed to make the Mishkan come together. Not that it was done on Shabbos. When they got the rules to build the Mishkan, when they were told what to do, they needed to kind of do certain things. So therefore, if they needed to have dyes to color the different fabrics and skins and cloths, they needed to plant the plant and plow the ground and all that. So the definition of malacha, because malacha comes up with Shabbos and comes up with building the Mishkan back to back in the psukim next to each other in Parshas Vayakhel, the definition of the prohibited malacha on Shabbos are the malachas that were needed to build the Mishkan.
Right, but I'm missing something.
Right? So you didn't
No,
do
it's
it on
The
Shabbos.
point is that we derive those halachas from what was required from the Mishkan.
To build the
To build the
Mishkan.
Mishkan. But
To erect the Mishkan.
But the Mishkan was never built on the Shabbos.
No, it was not. But the
So
definition...
The tying for the Mishkan's sake.
Anything. The planting, the Mishkan didn't run on Shabbos, they didn't plant on Shabbos.
Correct.
The definition of what makes a prohibited malach, I'll say it slowly, the definition of what makes a prohibited malach on Shabbos are the malachos that were needed to build the Mishkan on the weekdays to make the Mishkan come together.
Right.
Okay?
I get that. It's just...
So therefore it had nothing to do with whether you're going to tie on Shabbos or not.
Okay.
It's the same way that you can't light a fire on Shabbos. Right? When they made the Mishkan, they had to put certain things, make charcoal, so they made fires. You can't plant on Shabbos, not because they planted on Shabbos in the Mishkan, because they had to plant the plants to make the dyes. They didn't go shearing sheep on Shabbos in the Mishkan, right? But in order to make the fabrics, you had to get the sheep and shear the sheep and make the wool and spin the wool and so forth. Does that help you now? Okay, good. All right. I know it's confusing. It sounds like backwards logic. So at any rate, coming back to kosher. So the next two of the malachos here, and this is really after the listing of taking the wool off and setting the weaving machinery in place, is kosher matter. So the Gemara says, Kshir b'mishkan heicha havai, where do they have tying in the Mishkan? So Amar Rava. So this is the piece that Rob was alluding to, or he saw it's going to come up, or realized this may be a problem with what's about to say. Sheken koshim b'yisedos aholim, that when they would tie together the tents, and surely as well the curtains on the outside, they would have to tie together these ropes to keep them connected so they wouldn't fall over.
Yatate is a stake.
Yatate is not a stake. Yatate is a stake, or yatate.
Modern Hebrew, yatedot are like, I'm pretty sure stakes.
Okay, so the stakes, right? Correct. So in other words, yes. So it's not just maybe the tent stakes. It is also the curtains had different stakes that stayed between them. So on the out of the courtyard.
They had hooks. No, didn't they have hooks? The curtains are there.
But they had to keep them from falling over.
No, but the tent itself, the ohel, had a cover, remember?
Yes.
And what kept that cover from collapsing? They had stakes in the ground and ropes that they tied around the stake, like any other tent, I think.
Right, but it also talks about Yiriot Mishkan Vet Meit Rehem.
Oh, okay.
Something had to tie them together, keep them up. How does Mr. Archibald translate Yatedot? The pegs. Oh, the pegs?
Yeah,
Okay.
pegs, stake.
Peg stakes. Okay.
Pegs, yeah.
So these were, they attached the 10 pegs to keep things together. They had they tied them together. Does that make sense?
Yeah, kosher b'yatedot, yeah.
Okay.
I see.
So however it is, you're right, it's closer to being on the 10 pegs. But they would tie these things together in order to make sure they would be tight. And therefore the pegs, I guess, were tied. They put the pegs in. They tied the rope, to the ohel and to the other pieces. So the Gemara says, and here's the obvious question: Hahu kosher manas lahatehu. That's tying in order to untie. It's not a permanent kind of tie. Okay, so we have, and the Gemara will talk about, not in this parak, in one later program, was anything that's not a kesher, or what's called kesher she'eno shel kayama. It's not meant to last. Right? Now I know it could last for a while, but it's meant to tie, to untie. Now the truth is, I guess that question can be asked about any time you tie certain things together. Even the tightest knot you can always untie. Right? But the assumption is here, because this was a non-permanent structure, they would tie them, untie them, tie them, untie them.
Regularly untie, whatever regularly means. But exactly.
So if you are looking for the paradigm of something that's meant to be a permanent kesher shel kayama, this doesn't sound to be the right thing. Because when you tied them, you intended to untie them. That's why I said it's part of the discussion. What makes something permanent? Whether it really stands for a long time, or whether you intended it to stand for a long time. This looks like it could be standing for a week, a day. Who knows? Yeah. Right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu would say, okay, pick up camp. Right? The cloud would move and they started to scramble. Say, Elam Rabbaye, Shekain Orge Yerios. This is where the Yerios are. Shekain Orge Yerios, Shenifsika Lohenima Koshri Motal. That this is where they had the Yeriot. How they translate Orge Yeriot? The threads.
Something about the curtains.
Right.
The word before the curtains.
Orge Yerios,
the arrays, maybe? No. Arrays of curtains.
The curtain weavers. Oh, the curtain weavers. The curtain weavers. The weavers. The orge from the oreg.
Right,
the curtain weavers of the curtains. Shenifsika lahen knima. If a thread broke, kosher ota, they would have tied together. So in other words,
these are permanent. These are permanent.
It's meant to be permanent.
Yeah, exactly.
It's meant to be permanent, correct?
Right.
So now it's not saying that's the best thing to do. And you have to remember, maybe for opening day, the first time they put up the Ariot, the curtains, they wanted to make sure they were perfect. But I don't want to say that they tied it ad hoc at the last minute to make sure it was permanent, but inevitably as they put it up and took it down and traveled and put it up and took it down, every time they had to put it up, it's also part of preparing the Mishkan. So maybe by the 100th time that they put it up and they set up the curtain, a thread ripped, right?
Yeah, I'm wondering, even while they were making them, even like you said, they want to be perfect. But if you're weaving a whole big thing and one thread breaks, you're going to start weaving it all over again. You tie the little knot there and make sure it stays permanent. If you could, right?
So you could, that could be too. That this is even when it opens, you have all these humongous curtains, one little rip, you're going to tie together and just get on with the business. So who says this? Abaye. So Amalei Rava. So Rava and Abaye, of course, go back and forth against each other all the time. Tiratz the kosher, matir ma'ikal amema. Okay, so you explained to me this is kosher. I understand kosher.
Right.
Okay, I had to tie the threads ripped, and I have to tie them together, and I want to make sure they're tied forever, for good. What about matir? Right, because there are two malachas, kosher, which is tying, and matir, untying. So when would I do untying? Ma'ikal amema. So the Gemara says as follows. Well, what would be the opposite of untying? Why would I want to untie these threads on the Mishkan curtains? So the Gemara is going to suggest as follows. That sometimes if the curtain's ripped and the thread's ripped in 2 stitches at a time. So I say if this thread rips, I tie it together.
Right.
What if the next thread rips?
Beside it, yeah.
So I'll tie it together. But you know what? Now I've got a big bulge. I got 2 knots sticking next to each other. That's what Gemara said. That doesn't look nice. You wouldn't do that. You wouldn't do that for a king on this earth, right? It looks shoddy. It looks poor. It looks cheap, right? You mean you should replace the whole panel? Because once is a rip, it happens. But 2 rips together at the same place, and to put the knots the fat sticks out, that doesn't make sense. You understand or you don't understand?
I understand, but if it rips, you need some thread to be able to tie it.
Correct.
So you pull it through or something?
So you tighten it up.
But then you get okay.
You tighten them all up. You tighten them all the way down, I guess. You pull them back until you...
Maybe. I'm just curious.
Right, I agree. It's very skilled to work with a small amount of thread to tie it together.
Knot, yeah.
Okay. So you see what the Gemara is going to say. So, Tiras the kosher matir ma'ikal amemar v'chi teima. Maybe you'll say, here's where they had to be matir, they had to untie. If you had 2 threads that broke next to each other, it happened that 2 of these chutim snapped one next to each other. So what would they do? Shari chad v'koter chad. They would untie one and to move the break to a different place. So they may have to actually cut one thread and make 2 ties, right? In different places. So that's the matir. So I'm untying the piece even further from what it was. Because I see that I have to replace a second thread. So I don't want to really just replace them back to back because it snapped. I'm going to further untie it so I can make the second tie here. So the first tie is here, the second tie is here. That's the concept. So maybe you'll say that's what they're doing, that they're untying and then they're going to tie the second place as well. So Gemara says that really looks bad as well. Hashdal lefnei melech basav adam ein osim came lefnei melech machlem hakadosh baruch hu osim. You wouldn't do this for regular king. We do it for God. There's a concept that there's cheap things you're not going to do in the Beis Hamikdash. This is the sacred shrine for the Jewish people, so you want to make it look nice. Ella Amar Rava, Vitema Ravi lies. Now Rava comes back and gives an answer, response to Abaye. I'll give you another thing, or either Ravi Lai may say it. Shekain Sadeh Chalazon Koshin Matirin. The trappers of the Chalazon, which was this fish or snail that was used to trap, to take out and process tcheles, right? So they would they put out nets according to what the Gemara seems to be understanding. And periodically, depending on what the catch was, what they expected the catch to be, they needed to make the net bigger or smaller. Now, when they have this net, so you have a net, and the net is basically netting. It's knot after knot after knot. So let's say you realize suddenly you've got a whole lot of chilazon out there in the sea, and you need to kind of get a bigger net. So what do? You kind of take another net, and you untie part of the other net, and then you tie the netting together to make this bigger net. So you have both kosher, and you have matir. You have untying the first net, part of the other net, and you should maybe untying some of the knots in the first net to be able to adjust it to attach a secondary part to it. Okay? Think of this as, I don't know, whatever you want to think of it to be, right? Sure. So that would be, and that really is what the Gemara ends up with in terms of the process of what the actual netting is, or what the actual kosher and matir was. What was the paradigm for tying and untying? Now, what about other kinds of traps? Maybe they were, but they normally didn't really have to tie them and untie them. The chilazon, because they didn't really know what it was because it was under the sea, right? This they would may have to adjust the knots on a regular basis. Like fishermen have to make bigger nets and smaller nets.
Even you see pictures of lobster traps. I'm not sure why they seem to use rope. Don't they seem to use a lot of
Lobster traps, those wooden things.
They're wood, but aren't they all seem like touched with ropes? I'm trying to picture.
Because you want to capture the animal in a netting that's large enough for it to be able to be unencumbered, and at the same time to be caught.
They don't come out.
The sides all
they're wooden.
They seem to have a lot of ropes, a lot of rope, like roping.
Because probably also if it's solid, it's probably going to get broken up by the waves.
Exactly. I don't think it's exactly. It's all like slats and all ropes attached together.
That's right. It's malleable within the water itself. Now, what is the chalazon? So we'll have a discussion on Ayin Ham and Aleph about actually how they actually would trap the chalazon and how they would process the dye out. And when we get to there, I'll discuss to you what the chalazon is or isn't. There surely were a number of suggestions what they were. Reb Gershon Henech Lehner, the Regina Rebbe in the 1800s, thought it was some kind of fish or some kind of squid. It was sometimes squid, and they found out many years later it was a big fake, right? Because the chemist who helped the Regina Rebbe extract the blue from this black squid ink put in Prussian sulfate. Prussian sulfate, no?
What I remember is they put the squid in, which had black ink,
right? And they wanted to get
this Prussian blue. But they could have put any protein
right, because they put in iron fillings, clear iron fillings, which had this oxide in. There was some oxide, and when they exposed it to heat, it created it binded with what was there and ended up being blue.
Yeah,
there were other things as well, so that's one thing. Okay, that was the Regina Tcheles, which is fascinating. Rav Herzog, who was the chief rabbi of Ireland, right, and he did this for his PhD dissertation. He proved that it was not. He actually thought it was a different kind of snail than the present Psil Tcheles, so he got very close. And so he kind of destroyed the nirvana of the Reginas, but actually he redeemed himself because in World War II, with the Holocaust and destruction. So the factories where the Regina Tcheles was made was completely destroyed, and all the people who made the Tcheles were killed. And there was no way that they could, after the war, make their Tcheles. Whether it's right or wrong, it's not important. The fact it was theirs. So they actually were put in contact with Herzog, and he went through his dissertation because he had researched this at the early 19-teens or something, and he actually showed him how to reconstitute, how to build it, and the Reginas still have their own tcheles today ad hayom. So he's both responsible for the debunking of it and for the restoration of it. It's fascinating. But there are other things, including some types of snails and some other types of fish, and the prime suspect today that's believed is this Murex trunculus, which there are a lot of reasons we'll go through it. But it's a snail. Now, as a result, it's a snail, and it is a snail. It's a tiny snail, okay? Not a snail with a shell that looks like a tiny conch shell, but the shell itself is probably about maybe 2 inches across. But if you think of that kind of shell like a conch, it has an animal inside that lives and walks around and so forth. So, and it happens to have a hypobrachial gland that has the precursor for this blue that is then processed to make the blue. And there's an enzyme that combines with it that will make the blue turn really blue in sunlight. We'll go through it when we come to it. But the bottom line is, it's a snail. Now, I'm not clear in my mind how you would catch snails using nets.
Even
a fine mesh. A fine mesh.
When I went to a lecture about Tcheles from the guy from the Institute in Israel, and he said they get to Tcheles in Croatia or something, at the Black Sea.
Because they ran out.
That's what he said. And what they do is they have baskets and they put food in
Correct.
it. And they put the baskets in the water.
Okay, but
it's not nets.
I know.
So I don't want to say
anything.
That's what I'm saying.
That's what they do.
Snails come to the meet.
I'm not quite sure I understand how nets would work as much as baskets. All the pictures I've seen is they're pulling baskets out of this ocean. Whatever it is, they may have been, troughing it along and pulling them out of the seabed. I don't know. Okay, whatever. Maybe they had very fine mesh netting that they used in place of the baskets. Anyways, but that's the bottom line is the Gemara ends up with this conclusion that it's going to be about making the nets for catching the chilazon, and surely the chilazon were necessary for building the Mishkan. So even though it's not the actual dye, there's the precursor to catch the animal, to get the dye, and so forth and so on. Okay. So far, so good. Nice. So that's about what we do: kosher and matir. Now we come. So we've kind of barreled through the wool, and we did tying and untying, and now we're doing the next one, which is going to be tofer. Okay, so tofer and matir. Tofer is sewing, right? Okay, so we have tofer is sewing, and how much do you have to sew? Sew 2 stitches. Why do you have to sew 2 stitches? Why do you have to sew 2 stitches? Why can't you sew 1 stitch?
Oh, because we learned this, because 1 stitch doesn't hold.
1 stitch won't hold. What about 2 stitches? Will 2 stitches hold?
Not necessarily.
No. Well, at least there's a chance of it, maybe.
Well, maybe it's not a good. Maybe it's not always good for the Gemara.
No, but we learned that 2 stitches to hold.
It's got to go in and out.
Yeah,
Right.
that's the minimum to hold anything.
So
Why is it the minimum?
So what is?
Because 1 stitch is just going
What
through.
do you call it? Stitch?
No, 1 stitch is going through, right?
Well,
The question is, what is 1 stitch? Is 1 stitch? That's why that's a machlokes. Let's assume for now
Okay.
that the logic would be 1 stitch is in and out. Okay.
1 in and out.
Right. Here we go.
Out.
Here's my. It's a poor button. You can't
but if
see.
you-
I need a button that goes through and through.
Yeah, but
okay?
you put a button, then you go in and out, and it'll hold the
Right.
button.
So you do it twice.
Always
You won't
twice.
hold the button
You
either.
So
So you make a knot.
haven't
Like
Oh,
a-
you make a knot.
So that's actually
another-
that's what the Gemara is going to say.
That's what it is.
Okay, so that's what the Gemara
You make a
says.
knot, it's another...
Hatofer shtei
A
tfiros.
kosher.
Hatofer shtei tfiros. Okay, so the Gemara says v'holo kaima. So it's not going to stay. It's not going to be. Once again, and if you don't do something at last, you see, it's not really malacha.
Right.
This is not about just doing actions. This is about doing creative actions. So here you're doing the minimal amount that you need to darn or sew or whatever it is. So Amar Rav Chana, Rav Yochanan v'usha kosher. Provided that you actually need to tie off the 2 end threads to knot them together. Now, what this means, this is really interesting. What this means is that you cannot do the malacha of tofer without doing which malacha? Kosher.
Kosher.
Is that really what it means?
It sounds like
Right?
it.
That's what it looks like. Now, obviously, maybe if you already have two stitches in and you add 2 more stitches, it may stay, right? So that's more logical than if you already have a whole bunch of stitches, you need to simply just add 2 more. So you may not need to knot them at the end. It's already substantive enough. Possibly yes, possibly no. But you may remember that I said once there was a question: why does it say arba'im malachos chaser achas? Why doesn't it say simply 39? So there are a number of answers suggested based upon the Gemara, one of which is you can't really do kosher, tofer without doing kosher. So as if to say there's 39, plus you're going to have a double kosher that has to be matched up as well with the tofer. That's why it's 40 minus 1, as if to hint upon one of the 39 actually needs a double that goes with it. Because the way it seems to be, you really can't do one without the other. So look, you could do, now once again, you could do kosher, you could do tofer without kosher. I'll give you an example. Let's say you do 100 stitches. I do 100 stitches. Do I need kosher?
Well, not if this means it's transmitted by SD. Yeah, not if you go around. Of
Right.
course.
Let's say I do now. Let's say I stitched up my shirt all the way down.
Right.
Do I need to tie? Do I need to knot off the end?
It's usually not. Yeah, usually
You do,
it.
because otherwise
you do it.
it loosens.
You should,
It'll
yeah, I mean,
loosen.
at some point.
Put it through a
Eventually.
couple times.
If I do 1,000 stitches,
No.
so the reason we don't is eventually it'll start to unravel. Correct? It'll start to unravel, and somehow within the modern stitchings, it's going to come up and go over itself and seal itself shut. But it is possible to conjecture that maybe 100 stitches would not need a kesher at the end, only if I did 2. But because I want to understand what the minimal amount is, so the 2 minimally of tefirah would need to have a kesher. So that's about kesher. Now the Gemara doesn't ask where did they have kosher in the Beis Hamikdash, because the assumption was that you sewed many things together, right? There's this is tofer. This is sewing together, right? There's kosher, which is tying. And then there is, and tying really means you got 2 separate items. Tofer is sewing 2 things together to make 1 piece of cloth. So that's the tofer. And then the opposite of that, because most of these malachas have an opposite that may lead to it. So the listing was korea amanas litfar shtei tfiros. If you rip apart a stitch in order to tie 2 stitches, not only I start from the beginning, but there's a malacha of destructive. Provided the destructive malacha is going to help be creative, be constructive. Say that again slowly. All malachas are constructive. Okay? If the malacha looks like it's destructive, It's only destructive because I want to help it become constructive. So
to be a malach, in order to be a malach.
Correct, right. So, for example, this is the best example. Matir amanas likshar. You untie something to tie it together. Now, why do you have to untie to tie it together? Unsew, not tie. Unsew to sew together. So we're going to explain that in a moment. But we also had just before about tying, which was tying the knot. And what's the untying? I was careful to say it. I'm not sure if people caught it. Well, tying was tying for the netting to catch the chalazon. What's the untying?
Matir.
Yeah, what's matir? No, what's matir? So when did they have matir in the Mishkan? I said
what
it.
Did we say?
I wanted to see if anyone would catch it. You failed. Okay.
Did we say what we?
I said when they would make the nets.
Trying to see when we
you made the nets, but I said when they make a net, they have to add more to the net.
Right.
They untied it. They unsewed it from the other net. So that would be an example of the opposite of kosher, which is matir. Not that you're untying a net, you're untying it to be able to make another net. So it's matir amanas likshar. So the same thing is going to come up in terms of soser, knocking a building down. Mm-hmm. If I simply go and I destroy something, I destroy with a utensil or a building, that's not chayv min Torah. Excuse me. It's chayv min Rabbanan. I haven't done anything constructive, but let's say I'm going to knock it down in order to build something. That is called soser amanas livnos. Mm-hmm. So every malach has to be constructive to help the Mishkan. Okay? So the Gemara says here once again, so what's going to be constructive about ripping out the sewing, these two stitches? Kriya Mishkan mihavi. Where do they have ripping out in the Mishkan, undoing stitches? What would they do this for?
In order to build, in order to make
more. So Rabba Zera Demer Tavayu, Shekain Yuriya Shenofal Ba Dorna, a curtain that a dorna is a bug, probably like a moth, okay, like a caterpillar that eats out the hole in the cloth. Korin v'tofrin osa. They're korin ba. So I'll explain it to you what it says here. I'm not sure if I fully understand it. I understand. I'm not sure that it fully works in my mind. That if you have a hole, this caterpillar, this moth, drill the hole into the cloth. Okay. So what are you going to do? I think we may have mentioned it here at one point in one form or another. We did. Right? So we would sew it up and create a stitch around it. It doesn't look like they actually could do that.
Longer, we said that.
So they made it longer because if they simply sewed up the hole, it would pucker up. Mm-hmm. Right? You've got this fairly reasonable hole, and we all shook our heads when we said this. So if you tie that together, right, and just sew it up together, it would pucker up. This way, if you would rip the hole into a longer slit, you could spread out the pucker. It's easier to replace it or repair it and spread around the puckering in such a fashion that it would look like it has more integrity. So that's what it was. They didn't have invisible stitching. Okay. Amarav Zutra Bartuvia Amarav.
It's interesting, that they didn't bring up, nobody brought up that argument before, that how, for a king, how would you have a thing with a rip and you ripped it longer and any kind. Again, I just throw it out. It's interesting. I guess nobody thought of bringing it up. Remember before we said, well, you wouldn't do this in the base of Mikdash because it didn't look nice.
So apparently, that's what exactly. In other words, this is
better.
This is all hand labor with skilled artisans. Right. So I guess the way to make it look that it was presentable and look this looked better than simply where it puckered up.
I agreed with.
So when you have this long curtain, right? So in other words, if you could sew this together, it would be better than simply just sewing up a big hole. Okay, so that's what it was. So.
As opposed to really.
No, what I think what Moshe is saying is that this is not the same thing as having it brand new. Exactly. And the answer is yes, it wasn't brand new. It was taken up and down. Okay, Amarav Zutra Bartuvia Amarav Hamotech Chushel Tfira B'Shabbos Chayev Chata. So he says many things. The first item that he says really has to do with Shabbos. You have a garment that is sewn, and you have a very long thread. And the two parts of the garment came apart a little bit, and the thread ends are sticking out. So you pull the threads together, and you, I guess, tie them together. That's considered sewing as well. That's chayav akor mechatas. Once again, a lot of these gemaras about trying to find unusual things. So it's not just sewing a new thing, but if it unravels so that the two parts of the garment become a little loose, so you yank it together, sew the two ends together, sew the two threads together, or tie the two threads together, would be considered tefirah and would have a chamer. That's one item he says. Then he continues and says two other things that are unrelated to Shabbos. Okay, completely unrelated. V'alomei davar echad min hamagush chayev misa. If you learn anything from a magush, we don't know exactly what a magush is. Maggie may be related to the term of the Magi in the story of, the Jesus story. Possibly they were wise men.
They say heretic.
Yeah, I'm a heretic, or they're a heretic.
They say heretic. I don't know.
Are they going to talk about what it is? Because
they're going to talk about what this is.
We better figure out what it is.
Correct. So it says if you learn from this kind of person, who is obviously some very evil, bad, wise, wisdom, black magic, some kind of person, then you chayiv misa. That sounds like it's really pretty radical. Okay. Well, I'm saying, I just want to point out the word magush may be the same word as magi. Okay, or magus, which was a type of which is a type of sect that were. What we know about the magus was it was a sect. They were rabidly passionate about their faith, and you couldn't do anything else. Not like they were wise people, as in all the creches that you see. Okay, these were actually very strong people, and they were not good to Christians either, as well as not Jews. And they're responsible actually for many cases where Jews could not worship their things publicly. Okay. So that's the second thing. If you learn,
sect in Israel,
they're not alive anymore.
No, but at that time they were
Persia.
sect.
I think they're from.
This Persians, no, Magus, in Babylonia, in Parthia. Yeah, okay. They actually Jews did very well in Parthia and Persia, except for these guys. And if a person is able to calculate the different seasons and the constellations and astronomy and natural science, and you don't do so, you don't use this gift or this knowledge, then you can't even speak to this person. You can't even learn anything from him as well. It's a kind of also another thing, you can't speak to the person. So this is about these two other items. I realize you can see completely unrelated. Now let's talk about who this magush is. So the Gemara says magushta. Magushta is the same root as magush, okay? Or amgushta is also used. So Rav Shmuel chadamar charshe v'chadamar gedufi. So there's machlokas what this actually is. A charshi, Rashi says, is a it's not just only here. In any place where magush or amgushta comes up, what does it mean? One interpretation is a charshi is a machashev. He's a sorcerer, okay? And the other one is a gedufi. He's some kind of wild, radical, passionate priest who goes around running and cursing and saying all kinds of invectives against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he tries to also missionize people to come to belong to his faith. Okay, so that's the two choices. Okay, so he's either a magician with black magic, real black magic, like the Bilam kind of black magic, right? Bilam tried to be a prophet. What happened to prophet? He failed. What happened to Bilam at the end of his life? He got killed. But before he gets killed, he also was reduced to becoming a magician. In Sefer Yoshua and Perek, I think at Gimel or Tes, it talks about not only they killed Bilam, they killed Bilam HaKosem. So he had to retrain from being a prophet to become a magician. So there was powers of magic, like the stories of King Arthur. Okay, these are very very similar stories, right? The story about the sword.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
A similar story comes up in number of Medrashim, just as was last week's Parshas in Rashi, quite sure in Rashi somewhere, that Moshe was able to pull out the staff that was in the garden of Paro, and no one else could pull it out until young Moshe came along, and he was able to yank it out just like the staff, just like the sword of King Arthur.
A lot of the stuff is recycled from...
Correct, but the question is who recycles from whom? Or they recycle from the same things. Bottom line is, we have the choice is between a machashev, black magic, or a gedufi, which appears to be much, much worse. So the Gemara says, well, let's take our choices here and see which one is the worst of the two. Testaim the Rav, the Omar gedufi. Well, we don't know which is Rav and which is Shmuel. But let's say, says the Gemara, that Rav is the one who says gedufi. Why? The Amar Rav Zutra Bar Tuvia Amar Rav, because here we have a statement of Rav. Hadalome davar echad min amagush chayev misa. So he says what we just read now, which is what we just said, right? So this is like one Gemara that's quoting from our Gemara. It's a different kind of Gemara, and says if you learn one thing from a magush, you chayev misa. Now, what are the two choices? Either he's a magician, or he is this really rabid, destructive, invective-throwing, missionizing kind of person? Which of the two sounds worse? So the Gemara, and we're going to say that it's obviously going to be the worst one, because Rav is saying you can't learn anything from him. So the Yisal Gedak the Charshi, because if you say he is simply a machashev and a magician, well, there's nothing wrong with learning learning something from a magician as long as you don't do it. The Hoksiv, Lo Somad Lasos Kisav Osa Goyim Ma'im. This is in the Varim. It says you should learn to do from those nations are doing. You can't learn to do what? Lasos. There's nothing wrong with learning to do the magic. You can't do it. Lo silmad lasos. Avatala made lahavin ulaharos. You can learn to understand it. You can learn it to know how to respond. You can learn it so you understand what's going on. You just can't do it. You can't rely upon sorcery. You have to rely upon Hashem. So, tistayim. So which means what? To learn from a magician, to see what the magician is doing, Mechashiv is doing, there's nothing wrong. What's wrong is learning what he does for then you to do it. So, there's nothing wrong with learning from a magician that makes you chayiv misa until you actually apply it yourself. Ergo, if Rav says that you learn anything from a magush, you're going to be chayiv misa, it must mean this can't be the magush as a magician, it must be that he is this magus kind of invective-throwing priest. So that's how you see that Rav is the one who says that. Let's see, I remember once looking this up in Google, not Google, in Wikipedia, where everything, of course, is.
Everything's
Magus.
It's a slight digression from what we're learning here.
It's a little bit off topic, yes. I told you that.
Yeah.
A little bit.
It's hard to tie it in with Shabbat and the Olam Moed and the Mishkan, right? It's a little bit.
So one of the Star Trek shows or something about Magus. I wonder why they didn't bring it.
A member of a hereditary priestly class among the ancient Medes and Persians. And what else do we know about them? No, they were. I know it comes up in Star Trek or Star Wars or something. Right?
Star Wars, one of the Star Trek or something. I don't remember where. I can't remember. Because English.
Here we go. Here it is. Magi. This is it. Here it is. Okay. Magus are the followers of Zoroastrianism or Zoroaster. The earliest known. Okay.
That was a serious.
Yes. The earliest known word use of the word Magi is the trilingual inscription written by Darius the Greek, known as this something inscription. All Persian texts predating the Hellenistic period refer to Magus as a Zervanic and presumably Zoroastrian priests. Pervasive throughout the Eastern Mediterranean and Western Asia until late antiquity, the magus or magician, it's the same root by the way, was influenced by a Greek something or other, with their magic. This was in turn a product of Hellenistic fascination with Zoroaster, who was perceived by the Greeks to be the Chaldean father of the Magi, inventor of both astrology and magic. And what we know about this is that they actually are. It comes up in Iranian texts only twice before the 5th century BCE, and I'm trying to see where we know about the problems that they made for the Jews in a number of cases. Here go Semitic sources. No, this is much later. Okay, this is actually modern world. Right. So I believe that some of these issues they had where they couldn't announce about a bris. They couldn't light, when it says B'shas Sakana, they couldn't light Hanukkah candles outside in the ancient world, B'shas Sakana, because they wanted to control fires as well. And they were not very happy with people who did not believe in what they wanted to believe. So you have these kind of crazy Meshuggah priests, and they were perceived as a very real threat. So if you try to get close to them, besides probably getting killed yourself, you probably learn all kinds of very bad things that may affect you as well. So that's what the warning here to not to learn from a magus is probably really significant. So we have now 2 of the 3 items that's said by Rav, Marzutra, Bartuvia in the name of Rav. The last one about learning about the Kufos Mazalos will come to next week, and we'll get to maybe we'll spend a little time talking about the importance of learning second literature.
Did anybody bring up, in the Mefarshim, why this is brought in here, like what the connection?
Because he mentions the first one is applicable.
Which one?
Which is about the Korim V'Tofim, about Moteach Chuchel Tfira B'Shabbos Chayim Chatas.
Right.
So that's not unusual that you sometimes bring someone who's there's an unusual type of confluence of 2 people, Rav Zutra Bartuvia in the name of Rav. That kind of A in the name of B Doesn't come up very frequently. So when she mentioned, find one of them, you say, and he also said this, and he also said this.
Okay,
because you're never going to hear from this kind of group again, A in place B. You hear from A or B, but not A in name of B. So that's how it gets in there. But it's not too long of an excursus. Don't fret. It's only about 12 lines.
But it's just,
Okay.
I remember where we started